listening to the Straight to Video podcast with Rob Lane.
What's up, and welcome along to my show, Straight to Video. As always, I'm your host, Rob Lane, and I hope everything is going great with you all out there. On today's show, I'm super happy to welcome guitarist James Stevenson, who's had one of the most exciting, impressive, and varied careers in the music industry since the late 1970s. Starting out as a member of the London punk rock band Chelsea, James has gone on to play with the likes of Generation X, featuring Billy Idol. He appeared in the Kim Wilde Kids in America video and would later record with her too. He has also toured with The Cult and has been a member of the band Gene Loves Jezebel since the mid-80s, when he was recruited last minute to fill in on guitar for a US tour, and he's been a member ever since. Since the late 1990s, though, James has worked with Mike Peters and The Alarm, and I was lucky enough to tour with them a couple of years ago when our band supported The Alarm on their UK tour, and you know what, it was a truly wonderful experience to share time with both the band, but also their amazing fan base. James has a brand new solo album available, The Other Side of the World, which will be released from July, and you can pre-order your copy at his website, jamesstevenson.info. And also there you'll find lots of great info on James, including a really in-depth biography and some cool articles all about his different guitars and also his passion for motorcycles. Certainly lots of stuff to dive into. Before we get into the chat, I want to shout as always to Dead Skull Coffee, who are the UK's premier rock and roll coffee company, serving up some delicious ground or full bean coffee, and they're great supporters of this show too. In fact, if you head on over to deadskullcoffee.co.uk, you can grab 15% off your order as a thank you for the support. Simply add the promo code STV on checkout to get that sweet discount and know you're supporting a great independent business. So this is a great chat with James. He really has been on an incredible journey, which he hopes to make into a book at some point. He shares some awesome and insightful tales about growing up in London and being part of the great punk and rock and roll scenes of the 70s and 80s, along with tales of touring the USA with Gene Loves Jezebel, which, to be honest, sounds like it would make a great book just in itself. Hope you enjoy this, as I had a great time chatting with one of the hardest working and professional guitarists out there. So please welcome to the Straight to Video podcast, Mr. James Stevenson.
How are you?
I'm really good, mate. How's things with you?
Oh, haven't done a gig for 14 months, but apart from that.
Is that how long it is?
Yeah, last March 2020, I was on tour with Gene Loves Jezebel in Portugal, and everything got cancelled. My diary got obliterated.
Unreal. Was it pretty much booked out for the whole year?
Oh, we had some fantastic stuff, There was a festival in Long Beach called Cruel World, which I was going to be doing with Gene Loves Jezebel. And, Bauhaus were on it, Morrissey, Echo and the Bunnymen. It was all these cool, everything just gone.
How did you adapt to being at home all the time?
Well, it was just, it was pretty mad because I live on my own. So, sometimes I'd go 4 days at a time and, the only interaction I'd have with another human being in 4 days would be like the cashier in Sainsbury's. So it's been, it's been weird for us all, hasn't it? Really, really weird. But I think especially musicians have been, and probably actors and, people, in the creative sphere where they mix and mingle with a lot of other people. we've been hit the hardest out of hospitality too, but we've been hit bad.
Is everything kind of rolled over a year for you?
Yeah, lots of things have got rescheduled. I mean, I've got some gigs in August that have been rescheduled for the fourth time, but most things seem to be 2022. So, I've got some holy dates in March 2022, some alarm shows, so I think by then the world hopefully will slowly start getting back to normal.
You have to juggle more than most. How does that work for you with all the different bands?
Oh, well. Yeah. Well, it can be a juggling.
If something's going to clash, it's going to fucking clash. You'll have this one great gig and something else will come on that exact day.
I've been really lucky. But for example, Mike Peters, he emailed me about 6 months ago and he said, well, don't forget these dates, the alarm dates in March. And I don't think I'd got them for some reason. I'd already committed to these holy dates. But luckily, they were at the beginning of March and the alarm dates were at the end of March, so they didn't clash.
You were sweating as you pulled up your diary, like?
Yeah, I was on tour in America with the alarm in, when was it? 2018, I think. And Holy, Tony Visconti had his own TV show on Sky Arts and he wanted Holy to do a number. And we were in the middle of a 2-month tour of America with the alarm. So I had to go to Mike and say, listen, I really, really want to do this. And I said, the rehearsals are on the Friday and the actual TV shooting is on the Monday. So I'm going to have to miss about 5 shows. And he said, you can't do it. He said, tell Tony you can't do the rehearsal and just fly in for the one day on the shoot and then come back and join the tour and I'll get in a deck bass player for the one gig you're going to miss. So it all kind of worked out. I mean, I was a wreck by the time I got back because, doing all that flying, straight to a TV show, back to a hotel for 3 hours, back on the plane to, I think I met them in Atlanta or somewhere.
That's kind of a good way to do it. Like, let's just step back a little bit. How can we make this work?
Well, that's how it has to be, as you know, Rob, it's like the music industry has been decimated by the internet. And so really the only way you can make a living is to go out and play live. And so loads of people I know playing more than one band now. Other bands you're in have to accept that and realise that that's just the way the world's gone.
I've loved going back through your history. There's no way I'm going to cover everything. So I'll throw it right back to the early stuff. And for a lot of people, big cities like London can be quite overwhelming if you're maybe from a small town background. But did you grow up pretty much in the heart of London? So it's always kind of been the norm for you?
Yeah. I mean, I was actually born in Bath, but my parents moved to London when I was 6 months old. So I grew up in Kilburn until I was about 10. Yeah, I've always, I'm a Londoner all the way, even though I wasn't born here. And so London's never been a daunting city to me. I mean, it can be a tough city, especially now. I mean, I've got a grown-up son and, his generation. I mean, it's an expensive city to live in. And, for young kids, people under 30, it's really, really tough. And loads of them are just moving out of London. They ended up in Bournemouth and Milton Keynes, which I think is a shame. But, yeah, I mean, the thing is with London, it's always, it's lost a bit. But when I was a teenager, the music scene in London was just incredible. I was living with my dad in Chiswick, and there were like 6 pubs within walking distance that had live music. So you could, even if they were covers bands, at 14, 15, you could blag your way into the pub, watch someone playing, learn a little bit. That's how it was, and that sort of seems to have slowly been eroded, which I think is in most major cities. I think it's an incredible tragedy.
Everywhere's kind of like an identikit of everywhere else. You could be just dropped into any middle of the city and everywhere looks the same. It's ever so strange.
On YouTube, there's a video that I did of me going around all the former punk clubs of London, and I say the same thing because there's the Apple Store in Covent Garden. Used to be an amazing club called the Rock Garden, and I talk about that, and I just talk about how wherever you go in the world, it's the same shit. There's a McDonald's and a Pizza Hut and an Apple Store and a Starbucks. And it's like almost there's, you want a point to go to different countries, there's different culture, and you want it to be different, and it's all become homogenized.
You want to experience something in that city. That's why you want to go to that city, to experience that.
And the stuff that's unique to cities is getting smaller and smaller, in my view. So
for sure. Let's go for a drink. Where do we want to go? Oh, we're going to go to Costa because that's what we know, rather than, we found this really cool little coffee shop or something.
Exactly.
Did your parents move to London to work?
My father, quite an interesting guy, very interesting guy. They lived in Paris. My mother was from Bath. And my father. And the only reason that I was born in Bath is because my mother didn't want to have me in France. So I was nearly born a Frenchman. So they moved back to Bath and then back to London because my dad actually was a pornographic writer, believe it or not, in Paris in the 50s. He wrote for a famous publishing company called Olympia Press. And he got a straight job, probably mostly because of me. And and then they moved to London. He got this job as basically a civil servant, as a government press officer in the Central Office of Information. And so that's kind of, I think, why they ended up back in London. And then they split up a couple of years later, and as people do.
Who did you go to live with? Did you go and live with your mum or your dad?
I lived with my mum. Dad moved out of Kilburn, and then my mum moved to Richmond in West London. I lived with her for a few years. Then my dad moved to Chiswick, and I moved in with him because it was close to the school I went to.
Was there anything you remember being into before you discovered music? Because I know for a lot of people, I'm sure you included, once music comes along, everything else just kind of falls by the wayside.
Yeah, I mean, my dad lived in the Lots Road area, Chelsea, and when, we used to go there for the weekend, and I can remember being about 6 years old, and the kid upstairs was probably in his late teens, was playing the Beatles all the time, and I would stand in the hallway trying to listen to it, and one day he came out and invited me up, gave me a can of Tizer or something, and I just sat there listening to, I think it was probably Beatles for Sale or whatever album it was. But I always was really keen to be an archaeologist as well until I was about 10, but then the whole music thing, once you get sucked into that, it just took over. And then my best mate at school bought a guitar, and he's like, "You've got to get one too, James, because then we can be in a band together." So that's kind of how that all, and then I started going to, proper gigs, and when I was 14, 15, I can remember going to see the Faces at the Edmonton Sundown. That was the first proper gig I ever went to.
I read that was your first gig, and do you know that entire gig's on YouTube?
Oh, no, I did not. But I know they played it more than once. I think it was in 1972, and I can't remember which one I went to.
I did a quick search for it. I saw you'd mentioned that gig at one point, and so I just searched for the Faces, 1973, and the full gig's there. So wow. Where was you in that crowd?
Somewhere in the middle, downstairs. That gig changed my life completely.
Was that pre-guitar?
No, I'd started playing then. I was with my mate Noel, who'd made me buy one, and I was probably 14 and play a few chords and a few songs. And we used to muck about around at parents' places, trying to, with little amplifiers, trying to learn songs and fledgling stages of learning. So it's going to see a band. It's when Ronnie Lane was still doing it, and obviously Ronnie Wood, and it was fantastic.
I always say, can you remember who opened for him?
Do you know what? And I often ask people that because they were quite a good band, and I don't know who it was. No, but I can remember the lead singer started handing out bottles of beer to everyone in the audience and he said, the only way we could get a load of beer was to come and do this gig or something like that. But I don't know. I'd love to know who that was, but I think I've Googled that quite a lot and I could never find out.
What was the kind of crowd like? Was it an even ratio of boys and girls, or was it loads of girls? So you was like, I like this, all these girls screaming.
There were a lot of girls, not so much screaming. But, there's loads of, most people are under 30. And whereas now you go to a gig, you get a cross section of, all the way up. And it was 50-50 boys and girls, I would say. The Faces had a lot of male fans as well. Obviously, Rod was a bit of a heartthrob.
What had the effect on you? Was it just the whole sound, the whole concept of being on stage, do you think? Those very Rod Stewart, Ronnie Wood, very, very charismatic performers. And I just thought, this is what a band is meant to be, where everyone's important. There are certain bands, where I shouldn't mention them really in a way, but like bands like In Excess, to me, okay, you know who Michael Hutchence is, but you don't know who any of the other band members are. And for me, a band, it's like John, Paul, George, Ringo, them all, the Stones, every member. Charlie Watts is as important as Mick Jagger, and that to me is what real bands are about. In Excess, a great fucking band.
Yeah.
Is it because Michael Hutchence is just a bona fide star who the media focuses on? I don't know what it is, but I know what you mean exactly.
Yeah, I don't know, and I don't mean to be disrespectful because obviously they are a great band, but, that's just, the way the PR machine, I guess, worked for them. Michael, I guess, was so charismatic, but you'd think you'd know who the other guitarist was or something, but you just don't. Maybe that's just my ignorance. I don't know.
But you mentioned your friend got a guitar and said you should get one as well. But was that around the time you saw David Bowie and Mick Ronson on Top of the Pops as well? So it was like these two things.
Well, everything was happening at once. 72 to 74, you had the Faces. I was really into Slade. My favourite band of all were Roxy Music. And I went to see every gig I could, and they were just incredible back then. The whole Bowie thing. They're just the most seminal rock and roll acts of all time during that period. And so it was like every. And then you got even, sort of not B Division, but then you had the Alex Harveys and people like that who were just incredible performers. So it was an incredible time for music. And that just, every time I went to see one of these bands and they were just T-Rex. And I was like, wow. And you just think, this is amazing.
Your mind's blown every couple of months.
Absolutely, that's how it was, yeah.
And then I guess punk started to infiltrate into that as well.
Yeah, and then, well, I can remember then there were sort of 75, 76, no one really knew what was going to happen, and Bowie had sort of made Young Americans and gone off on a tangent. Roxy Music had split up, and then they came back with Manifesto and stuff later, which are very different stuff for me. It's the early stuff that I really love. And then there were these bands that, the media, who back then, got things so wrong. They were championing this band called Racing Cars. I don't know if you can remember them.
No, never heard them.
Oh, my God. They were like, this is the next big thing, 1976. And then the Sex Pistols came along and said, are you fucking having a laugh? And then punk happened, and that was like, wow, I can remember the first gig I did with Chelsea was at the Hope and Anchor in Islington, supporting Wayne County when he was still Wayne. And he was just incredible, and the punk thing, you didn't have to be that proficient musically to like be in a band. There's that famous thing in Sniff and Glue, Brian James from The Damned, where he draws like 4 chord charts, and then underneath it says, now form a band. Stuff like that. And that was very much in the spirit of the moment.
There's a really cool bass joke, which I like. The tears to learning the bass, and it's like the first one, learn the notes on the strings or something. Second one, learn to play 4 notes. Never did the third lesson because I had a gig.
Yeah, exactly. That's how it was. Brilliant.
Being like kind of in the heart of London, where do you used to buy all your records from?
I used to go into Soho and get stuff. HMV and everything was there. There used to be a really nice little sort of independent shop, and that's what you miss, called One Stop Records in Richmond. I used to get buy lots of stuff there, and sadly, well, most of these places have gone. Obviously, people don't even buy CDs anymore, but you go out, have a Saturday job, have a bit of money, buy a record, and having a look at the gatefold sleeve on the bus, and it was an amazing thing,
You always remember where you got those records from and the journey you took to get those records. Now, as great as downloading it is, and you've got that instant music, you can't remember the day you downloaded that album or something like that. There's not those memories attached to it.
Yeah, and I used to like albums and indeed CDs just because of the information. I mean, I want to know who played on it, who produced it, where they recorded it. All that stuff's interesting to me. And if you just go on, Spotify and listen to a song, you don't get any of that.
Did you used to buy all the clothes? Was there some cool shops, especially with the punk stuff?
Yeah, I mean, everyone knows, Malcolm Vivian, but there was also, there was Acme Attractions, Boy. There were all these independent shops, selling punk stuff and made your own stuff. I mean, so it was before, same thing, pre-homogenization of the world,
What was kind of your first steps into forming or joining a band? 'Cause didn't you have like a band called Metro?
I had bands at school, and I used to play bass at school. Not as good as you, of course. And there was a really good friend of mine, Henry Badowski, who's a bit of a he's a sort of a legend. He made one solo album in 1981 for A&M. I actually got him to guest on my new record because there's a song that I wrote called In the Night Time, which I wrote when I was 15. And Henry's always, we were in bands together at school, and he's always saying, every time I do it, so I'm doing that. He's like, you've got to do that song.
He's always remembered that song.
He's always remembered that song and said, you've got to do it for your new album. So that's the reason I did that. Yeah, so I was in bands at school and with, Henry, who was talented. And then I was in a band called Metro, which Henry was in as well. And that was like, so we met some people, a guy called Norman Lane, through just an ad in Melody Maker, I think. And then punk happened, and then that was the end of everything. I saw a thing, I can't remember what the advert said, but it was actually just an advert at the beginning of 77 in Melody Maker for punk rock group Want Guitarist or something like that. And I thought, because I've been listening to the New York Dolls, my girlfriend was into all that stuff. And I think I started listening to that while people was listening to the glam stuff, I had sort of got into, the Stooges, New York Dolls and bands like that, which were a bit more punky. So when the punk thing happened, I just wanted in. So I went to this audition, and it was in North End Road in the bottom of a record shop called Beggar's Banquet, which was before Martin Mills had Beggar's Banquet, the label. It was his shop. And went down there, was Gene. Yeah, I was just 18 years old.
Had they told you anything to learn in advance?
No, didn't have a clue. Carey, the drummer, was a bit more musical, and he said, well, we'll do this one, and this is how this one goes. And they played me sort of, I think, a cassette they had of they recorded the album, or not the album, the single Right to Work, but it hadn't come out yet. So they played me that, and so I learnt that just then and there. And afterwards, like, Gene was like, yeah, all right, you're in. And I was like, oh, shit, am I ready for this,
And they had like loads of other people apply for the gig, but you just stood out, do you think?
When I got there, I'll never forget this. There's a guy called Andy from a band called The Zips, and he was older than me, and he was probably a proper guitarist, but I can remember he was there, and then I went in, and he was still there packing his stuff up. And he just looked older than me and just so much more like he knew what he was doing, But I don't know, Gene. I think Gene just wanted someone really young,
So was performing with Chelsea, was that kind of had you been involved in like the London punk scene before then? You've been going to gigs and submersing yourselves?
I've been going to gigs a bit, I've been to the Roxy and, I used to go and see a lot of Wayne's County's gigs and stuff, especially after we started playing with him. And I'd done gigs. I played at the Marquee with that band Metro as a support band. So I'd done a few gigs in central London in proper venues. But then when Chelsea happened, that was a proper band and, you had an agent and then you were on tour.
I watched your video, which you mentioned earlier about going around all the punk clubs. And did you mention you did a show with a band called The Makers, who would later go on to be Spandau Ballet?
That's right, yeah. They supported us at the Roxy. Well, that's the story that I tell on that video that, because Steve Norman, the sax player in Spandau, is a really good friend of mine now. But when I was playing with Kim Wilde and I used to do a lot of the same TV shows as Spandau, there's a big thing in the New Musical Express about how Spandau Ballet used to be a punk rock group called The Makers. And I said to Steve, is that true? They used to be in that? And he's like, no, it's not true at all. They couldn't admit they were a punk band supporting Chelsea for some reason. Because they were Spandau Ballet, the biggest band in Europe at the time.
And all that information would be readily available nowadays.
Yeah, of course. Now you can't keep anything secret. But a few years ago, Steve, he said, yeah, we were the Makers.
Chelsea allowed you to go on tour in the UK and Europe, but didn't it give you the opportunity to go to the USA as well?
Yeah, and Europe. First time I ever played abroad was with Chelsea. In fact, I had my 20th birthday in Paris and we had a week-long residency at a club called Jeebus Club, which I think is still there. And then in 79, we had Mars Copeland was our manager. Well, he was the label, manager, agent, everything. His brother Ian had an agency in America called FBI and he brought loads of Mars's bands over, including Chelsea. So I think it was February 79. Over we went. And Miles, I think he was really short on money and he was so hands-on. He actually came over and tour managed the tour. Well, the first week of the tour, and then he just couldn't handle it anymore. And he got his right-hand man called Harry Malofsky to come over and finish it off.
How long was you over there for?
It was just the East Coast, about 3 weeks. Went into Canada, into Toronto and Montreal. So that was the first time I'd ever been to America. And it was like, wow.
Yeah, a good experience.
That was awesome, yeah.
You joined Chelsea, but Billy Idol had left by that time.
Well, the original band was basically Generation X with Billy playing guitar and Gene October singing. And then Billy and Tony and the drummer called John Toe, they left to form Generation X. And then there was a guitarist called Marty Stacey who replaced Billy for a little while. And then I basically replaced Marty. So, yeah, Billy was long gone. And then obviously 3 years later, I joined Gen X.
How did that work? How did that all come full circle? Was they keeping an eye on what was happening in Chelsea or was it all kind of...
I think it was just an accident, I'd already left Chelsea when that happened. In fact, I can remember sitting in the van with Chelsea and I was probably 21 and God knows we were going to do a gig in Sheffield and I was like, what am I doing with my life,
You suddenly had holy shit.
Yeah, a revelation, I'd scraped through sort of 3 A levels. So I thought, I'm going to go to university, at 21, I'll be a bit of a mature student. So I applied for a few places and I actually got, accepted a couple of offers to be accepted, I was going to do that. And then a month later, Tony James rang me up and said, do you still want to be in Generation X? It was that was the end of my academic career.
So you had this massive revelation and just a phone call, just a boop.
I thought, what, university or join Generation X? No contest. So, yeah, and so then, I was only in Generation X for about 6 months right at the end.
Was it easy to see things were focusing on Billy, do you think? Because he just went on to become one of the biggest kind of...
Yeah, but, the thing is with Billy, you always knew he was going to be... he was already a star. He had so much natural charisma. Not always the world's greatest singer, but, he's just... Whatever that thing is that's... People like that, he's got that thing in abundance. Band's manager, who I never even met, I dealt with the British A&R guy from Chrysalis Records, a guy called Steve Andrews, but Bill O'Coin, who managed Kiss, was their manager. I never even met him. And Tony, I can remember when Billy left, because it all came as a bit of a surprise, Billy leaving, and Tony James was like, sorry, James, but you've joined a sinking ship. And he said it was all high-level manipulation from Bill O'Coin and people high up at Chrysalis, wanted Billy just to be, go on and be a solo megastar, which of course he did.
What year was that then? What year would that be?
1981. Early 1981, yeah.
Was that pre-MTV or was that kind of just as MTV was starting?
Pre-MTV, I would say MTV really was sort of 83, 84 when it, and when MTV was at its height, in the mid to late 80s, I mean, they could make or break a band. But by the same token, in the 70s, so could the music papers in this country,
Yeah, for sure. You would be asked to be part of Kim Wilde's band when she was making the video for Kids in America. Do you remember what you thought of the song when you heard it for the first time? Do you think that is a hit?
Kim is absolutely adorable. But I can remember because I knew Calvin, who was Mickey Mouse's son, and he rang me up and he said, do you want to be in this video? That, my dad's just signed this new girl singer. I'm like, yeah. And he's like, pay the MU rate amount. And I'm like, okay. Because I was, Billy had left Gen X literally 2 weeks before this. I thought, yeah, could do some money. That'd be great. So I went down to his studio in St. John's Wood. Kim was there. She's lovely. And her brother. And I heard the song. And it was very poppy. And I was used to playing punk rock, And but I thought, no, this is all right. I can, just mime along, because I'm not on the record. I'm just in the video. And then after that just, I thought, well, I'll get the check for this and then, probably never hear about it again, And then suddenly it was like number one everywhere in Europe 3 weeks later. So then we go out and just do, because Mickey Mouse he didn't want Kim to go on her own because he wanted the cameras for any TV show just to have something to cut to. So he used to send us, the band, in inverted commas, because we didn't play live. Yeah, and it was a lot of fun, but I was basically a professional mimer then for a year, yeah.
Just like a promo TV tub bouncing to all these different music shows.
Yeah, we used to go 2, 3 in a day.
Who was you crossing paths with then? There must have been a list of...
well, like I said, all the bands, sort of Spandau, bands like, The Look and Kelly Marie and Visage, everything that was happening then, all those bands were going, because the way to break a record then was to get on TV in Europe. There was a big one that, God, I can remember. And we had great after the parties back at the hotels and stuff. Kirsty MacColl would be there doing Chip Shop and everything. There was one in Germany called Musikladen that was like their version of Top of the Pops. Just full of British bands. We used to go out there like once a week and do that thing.
Do you remember how you were feeling during all this time? Because you're saying like one project was kind of just leading into another. Did it just feel like a bit of a whirlwind with all these different opportunities?
It's always been a bit like that for me. And I've always been really lucky, Rob. I've been doing what I do for 45 years and I'm really grateful and I feel I'm lucky to have been able to do that. But for me, it always feels like when something fell apart, something else just always seemed to crop up for me. So like in 1993, when Gene Loves Jezebel, we signed to this label called Savage, which was also it's a maverick label. They signed Bowie for North America and they went bust while we were on the road in America, which is a shame because we lost, one of our best albums, our 6th album, Heavenly Bodies. I thought, oh, God. And, I had a flat I was living in Earl's Court with my wife. I had like a 3-year-old son. God, now I've got no income. And then 3 weeks later, Billy Duffy rang me up. He's like, fancy doing a world tour with The Cult? It's rhythm guitarist. I was like, yes.
And you sometimes have to think do things happen for a reason? Because if your tour had continued, that opportunity would have never...
That's right, because Billy would never have poached me. But he heard that Gene Loves Jezebel had split up and he thought, oh, James, that'd be a good... So I've known Billy for years, he'd be like, he'd be a good wingman for me,
Have you always felt comfortable moving from one band to the next? Have you always been able to quickly adapt to a new band's dynamic?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a very quick learner. But all bands are different, not only musically, but sartorially as well. I mean, I wear different stuff slightly on stage to Gene Loves Jezebel, to The Alarm, to Holy Holy. Different things fit. I mean, they're all me. Sometimes I'll be in a shop somewhere and see a shirt. I'm like, that'd be great for Holy Holy. But it wouldn't work for The Alarm, Every band's a bit different and you have to kind of implant your own personality into it.
How long does it take you to suss a band out?
Oh, God, that's a really interesting question. It depends on the band, and also your own experience. I mean, now I'm probably much better at that, and even though it doesn't arise so much as I was in, when I was just joined Chelsea, it took me a while to kind of feel my way. And Gene would say, you can't wear that shirt. And I would sort of listen to him because, Gene always looked great. Yeah, but I'm playing in lots of different bands. I mean, it's a challenge as well for your playing. I think it's good for your playing, just for diversity, just learning how to fit into different things.
Definitely. And I think, like you say, like when you started Chelsea, Gene was telling you what to do and stuff like that. And I think you just soak these influences and this knowledge up and you apply it later on in your career when you perhaps don't realise you're doing it. It's just stuff that comes natural.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's all a learning curve.
I think perhaps one of your quickest band dynamics you've had to fit in was when you got the call to go out with Gene Loves Jezebel in the mid-'80s and join their US tour. That must have been a bit of a mind melt and all the moving pieces to make that happen.
To be honest, I think I had a massive nervous breakdown on that tour. Oh, yeah, I was playing with a guy called Steve New, who was the guitarist in the Rich Kids. In fact, I covered one of his songs that had never come out on my new album, just as sort of a tribute to Steve, because I loved him. And he died, really sadly. He was only 50 of stomach cancer. But we had the same management as Gene Loves Jezebel, and their guitarist was having a massive problems being on the road. Well, it sounds funny, but it's probably at the time really horrible. But Jay, the singer from Gene Loves Jezebel, the first inkling he got that something was wrong was they were driving from, they'd only done about 3 gigs in America when they called me over, but they were driving from New York to Boston to do a gig. And they stopped at a truck stop to get like gas, petrol. And Ian, the guitarist, just ran off into the woods. And Jay said, I knew something was going wrong, I'm like, yeah, probably not great. Anyway, Jerry, the manager, he's like, you might have to go on a plane in the next couple of days and go and save this tour. And that's kind of what happened. So, yeah, that was pretty daunting. So I got out there and we had 2 days rehearsals in a place called John Hanty's in New Jersey. And then on the road, I can remember the first gig was in Pittsburgh at a place called the Decade Club. I'd learned about 6 or 7 songs and it was all just a blur. And I can remember starting this one song called Shame, which just at twice the speed it was meant to be. But, slowly learned, well, not slowly, quickly. By about the 4th gig, everything was fine. And that tour was something that anyone that was on that tour will never forget. And the band was like gaining a following so quickly, especially girls.
Was it a headline tour for them or a support tour?
There's a headline tour, clubs. Well, there's a few support that they supported Midnight Oil. That's where I turned out. I flew into New York, went to a place called the Ritz, which is called Webster Hall now, and they were supporting Midnight Oil. And in fact, the manager, Jerry, had forgotten to put me on the fucking guest list. So I turned up there with my suitcase and everything. And I hadn't taken a guitar because I didn't have a work permit. So Jerry said, look, we'll take you down 48th Street and buy you a guitar when you get it. Yeah, so yeah, it was mostly clubs. And when we got to LA, we did 2 nights at the Roxy, and it was rammed, and it was like obvious the band were going to do well.
Crikey, what was LA like on the West Coast in the mid-'80s?
God, it was just full of gorgeous women for a start. Yeah, that was the first time I'd ever been to LA, and I had an Irish girlfriend at the time, and she had some friends there, some gay friends who lived there, so I sort of hung out with them a bit, and they sort of showed me round, and because we were there for about 5 or 6 days. Mike and Jay were doing a lot of promo, the twins, but I loved LA. Well, at first I loved LA, and then I didn't like LA, but now I really like LA again. So I have a love-hate relationship with that city.
Have you got your little places where you like to go to avoid the stereotyped LA? Just find your little niches in there.
The thing is that I say to, people, because I know LA as well as I know London. The thing is with LA is it all mostly goes on in people's houses. There's no centre. There's old Hollywood and there's a few cool bars and stuff there. But it's not like London where you're going to Soho or Mayfair and you're in the centre of town. It's just not like that. And I know people like my son went there and just didn't like it. He didn't know. You have to know people. It's one of those places. You can be left in peace. Whereas, London's a tough city, just to exist in with all the... I can't even drive my car into London anymore. But, LA, you can probably park illegally. You won't get a ticket. Stuff like that, where you just feel a bit more relaxed,
You've been an integral part of Gene Loves Jezebel since it's a band which has obviously had a lot of drama over the years.
Oh, my God. Listen, every band has its own personal problems. You talk to Steve about Spandau, but Gene Loves Jezebel takes the biscuit, I can tell you.
Was there even frictions and drama even on that early tour, on their upward spiral?
Massive. Between Mike and Jay, there was always massive friction, because Jay played rhythm guitar, but he did actually sing most of the songs. And Mike would just do his dancing around the front and stuff. And Jay didn't really like working with him. That was the thing. And that gradually came more and more and more to a head until it exploded in 89. Sadly, Jay and Mike, I don't think they'll ever repair their relationship. It's been 20 years. We've been in litigation with Michael. Last time we played in America, he tried to sue us to prevent us from playing. It's just horrible. And we won the lawsuit and the judge made him pay our costs. So, and he still doesn't give up. Crying shame. Can I just get this? It's my son.
Yeah, of course you can.
Oscar? Yeah, mate. I'm just in the middle of doing an interview. Can I ring you back in about half an hour? Okay, cheers, mate. Bye. Sorry about that. There's one person, anyone else, I would have just fucking put it on silent. For some reason with my son, I always have to take a call.
Got to, always, mate.
Have you got kids?
I haven't, no.
You will understand one day if you ever have them.
We're only into the 80s at this point, and already you've had like enough of a career for several musicians' careers. You'd later be part of The Cult, largest amount of session work. You did lots of pop stuff in the 90s, didn't you? You did stuff with like Jimmy Nail and Louise on there and all that kind of thing.
I mean, that was just stuff that I did when, lots of the time, I knew producers that were producing those people, and, if they wanted a bit of guitar, they thought that what I did would suit the record, they just like get me to come down, so I ended up on Max and K by Tricky, which is a seminal album. And then, I did all that stuff. Jimmy Nail, that was a producer friend of mine called Steve Robson, who went on to Mac, he wrote stuff for Take That and everything in the end. He producing Jimmy Nail, and he got me down. And also, you got paid, so that was great. And it's also great to walk in and, they say, well, this is the song, you have to listen to it. What I always think is important as a guitar player is you have to, what does this song need? Sometimes I hear a record and you think they haven't thought about the record, they've just done what they do and put it on the record. And that can be all right. But a lot of the time, it's sort of incongruous. That's what I love about Mick Ronson, because you listen to the parts that he created for all that Ziggy stuff, and it's just genius. I mean, I say to people, the guitar solo on Live from Mars, it's not hard to play, but it's genius to invent. And that is the true gift and talent.
Playing for the song, not for yourself.
Yeah, just what does it need?
I meant to ask you a second ago, when you said you went to New York with Gene Loves Jezebel, but you went without a guitar. They took you out to get a guitar. What guitar did you get?
I got a Gibson Les Paul. I had to get I was used to, it was the first time I'd ever owned a black one, because I'd always had white ones. Yeah, I wish I still had that guitar, but then I ended up selling it when I was broke later on, as you do. But I think it's the only guitar I've ever bought brand new. I tried to get a second-hand one, but couldn't find one that I liked. And I had limited time, we had an hour, right, go, come out, let's get you a guitar, quick.
Did they have to cancel any shows before you came out?
I've got a feeling a couple got rescheduled, but mostly it all, there were couple of days off in New York, and then off we went. And then it was like 2 months, 10 weeks, solid on the road, big drives. It's the first really big tour of America I've ever done.
Do you do all Middle America as well?
Everywhere. Midwest, Omaha, Nebraska, Des Moines, all these places that, I've probably never been to since, but it was a big tour. And the agency and the label were all saying, it's really good to get into these places where they're not used to having band. Gene Loves Jezebel was a very different looking band.
Yeah, you got a reaction in some of those places, I bet.
Oh my God, we had the drummer was called Marcus Gilvear, and he had long hair and all pipe stuff but in 1985 it was different. Now you probably get a second look. But I can remember he was driving the van for some reason, right in the middle of mid-America, and got pulled over really for no reason. Maybe he was speeding, I can't remember. And the cop had pulled over, and the cop came round, and Marcus stuck his head out. And I thought the cop was going to scream. It was so funny. It had New York plates on it. And he obviously thought we were from New York, the cop. And he said, oh, you guys from New York? He said, I've been there once. I wouldn't go back there.
It's not the venues or the city you're going to. It's when you have to stop at the truck stop part way. That's when you perhaps have to worry about it back in the 80s when you're looking like those guys did.
Yeah, back then, yeah. And Mike and Jay lipstick, full makeup. I mean, the band had a unique thing going on, without a doubt. I mean, I can remember the first time I went into the rehearsal the day after I got there, and Ian Hudson, the guitarist, I really wanted him to show me some stuff, and he couldn't really do it. He would like lie on the floor and curl up in the fetus position. I mean, he was in a bad way. But they did this one song they played called Upstairs, which is off the first album, Promise, and it was incredible. I mean, the power, when I saw that. And Pete Rizzo, the bass player, just really, really great bass player. And the band was great.
Right now, you're about to release your new solo album, The Other Side of the World. Is this mainly, well, you mentioned there's like a really old song which you put on there, but is it mainly new material written and recorded during the past, like, nuts 12 months we've had?
Yes. First lockdown was hard for us all, but I've got my little brother Dave had a really horrible terminal illness called Pick's disease, and he died last June in the middle of lockdown.
Mate, I heard about that. Sorry to hear that.
I mean, that's affected me very, very badly. And anyway, I wrote this song because he lived in Australia, and I wrote this song actually for his funeral called The Other Side of the World. And because he was mentally, it's a neurological disease, so he was on the other side of the world mentally, and also he lived in Australia, which is the other side of the world. So, so everything's like my first solo album. A lot of those songs were really old songs. And you have to sort of, it's an exorcism where you have to get them out of your system. But the new albums are nearly all new stuff, apart from that one really old one. So, yeah, and there's that song about my brother on it, and the album's dedicated to him. And all the songs are new, yeah. Yeah, apart from there's the opening track, quite old, but it's not like my first album where everything were, or most of them were older songs. After I'd written that song about my brother, I spoke to Peter Walsh, who produced it, and I said, do you think we could do a whole album like this? And he said, yeah, remotely, just sending stuff. Every musician has got their ideas, tape and stuff that they start going through that and deciding which is worth pursuing and turning into a song. And then you have to sit down and basically, write all the lyrics to each song. And, that it took me a year to do the record.
Definitely an album which is going to have a timestamp on it for you for many reasons then.
Absolutely, yeah.
And just in closing, James, any plans for a book or a memoir of your career, or maybe just your insight on the London music scene of the 70s and 80s? You've obviously still got a big passion and knowledge for it, which I think can make a great book.
No, I've been working on my book. It started off, it was going to be called 25 Years in the Rock and Roll Wilderness, and now it's 45 years. I have started, I'm about 180,000 words in, and I'm only halfway through it. I started thinking, I have actually got quite a good story, because it's not just all about, Keith, it's all about the Rolling Stones, isn't it? I've been in all these different bands, and also I kept diaries. So whenever Billy Idol said something funny or Ian Astbury did something mental, I've got it all written down so I can remember it. But the hard part is like trawling through my diaries and reading them. But I've been doing that, but I've been working like 10 years, and I'm up to about 1995 when I first did the first Cult tour. And I will, now I've got the album out of the way, I will go back to working on the book, and hopefully I'll get that out in the next year or so.
You'll have to do different volumes.
Well, that's what I was thinking. I could do the first, go back and call it 25 Years in the Rock and Roll Wilderness, and then the sequel could be called Another 20 Years in the Rock. You know what I mean? In fact, then I could get one out sooner. Maybe that's a good idea. We'll see.
Thanks ever so much for doing this, James. It's been lovely.
Oh, it's an absolute pleasure.
All right, I'll let you give your lad a ring back.
Okay, Rob. Hopefully see you soon.
Cheers, mate. Take it easy.
Cheers, mate. Bye.
Top bloke, that James Stevenson, and want to say thank you to him for all the great stories and checking in with us here on the Straight to Video podcast. As mentioned earlier, please be sure to visit jamesstevenson.info to grab a copy of his new album, The Other Side of the World, and check out his YouTube channel too, which is James on Guitars, where you can watch the really cool walkthrough video of all London's old punk clubs. James certainly knows his stuff on all that, and it's great to hear. Thanks for the continued love and support of this show too. It really means a lot to have you all continuing to listen and send your comments and feedback. A bunch of stuff is happening in the background, which I hope to announce around the release of the landmark episode 100, which is coming up in just a few weeks. So please keep up to date at stvpod.com and on all the usual social media platforms. And watch this space as this show continues to grow thanks to all your great support. But that's all for this episode. It's always fun putting these out to you. So until next time, please take care, and I'll speak to you all again real soon.